Content warning. The following episode discusses themes of suicide and substance use. Viewer discretion is advised.
Welcome back to our Surviving Social Isolation podcast. My name is Stephanie.
And my name is Haley. And in this podcast, we're going to be talking about social isolation and how it affects the individual as well as communities. Welcome back to Surviving Social Isolation, episode 4. We're going into part 2, and we are just going to jump right into the conversation. What is the line, and how do we, as individuals, but also as like a community, recognize when something is self-care and when something is harmful, and more specifically, when those things don't matter? Let's say we're talking about heroin users. Many of the recommended treatments for heroin addiction or like opiate addictions really in general is a decreased prescription or replacement of that substance.
Yeah.
So like there are lots of people who are on prescribed heroin or are on methadone.
Yeah.
And those substances basically get them to a level of functional and keep them there and allow them to kind of exist in the world. There is not a single person who can say that that is not self-care. Like, you know, you can't go up to someone who has had such an intense dependency on heroin and are now, to manage that dependency, are on like a base level prescription for heroin so that they don't get sick, so that they don't have withdrawal symptoms, so that they don't increase their intake, like all this stuff. You can't look at that and say, that's not good for you. Heroin is fundamentally bad for you. And it's like, that might be true, but it doesn't matter at this point, because at this point, this is a form of self-care. This is a form of maintaining your mental and physical health. And so I think like publicly, there's a lack of understanding of the fact that, yes, there is a fine line when something switches from good to bad, but there's also a reality where things that you perceive as bad are, it fundamentally doesn't matter, because it is part of what helps keep this person functional and keeps this person like existing and thriving and for lack of better words, surviving in this world.
The other thing that was very interesting during COVID was not only self-care being a very trendy word, very in your face, but it was almost felt like an advertisement, including myself. Like my spending habits definitely changed and looked a lot different during the past 2 years. And I was just saying, oh, it's self-care.
Again, nothing is in a vacuum, and nothing is solely isolated. Like no man is an island. And so the concepts like self-care and the concepts like burnout, and kind of even above and beyond that, the concepts of what is and isn't financially reasonable, what are financial necessities and financial luxuries. Like if I have X number of dollars just around, that's fine. But what happens if I'm treating myself and suddenly I can't pay my rent, or I can't pay to keep the lights on? Or, and like, especially during the pandemic, it's like, what if I can't pay my internet bill? 2 years ago, arguably, I don't believe this, but I know a lot of people do, arguably the internet was not a necessity. You could survive without the internet. Now it's real, like if you don't have the internet, you're all but screwed. And like that's really a scary thing, especially if there are people who don't have dependable housing, who don't have a dependable income. You also have to now compete financially. For instance, you have to compete financially with keeping the internet on for the sake of getting through your stuff, and then also like buying
Groceries.
Well, but not even buying groceries, buying things that contribute to your self-care, because self-care has been commodified.
We can't judge people doing it either. Like you said, it's like in a world where we commodified self-care and where materials is supposed to help us feel good, we can't punish people who believe in that anymore.
There was an American senator a few years ago who was talking about like Medicare for all. And he very publicly was like, oh, well, if people want to be able to afford healthcare, then they shouldn't be wasting their money on iPhones and avocado toast. It was just this fundamental misunderstanding of there's a difference between access to a fundamental right, i.e.,
Mhm.
your health, and the little things that you do to positively affect your quality of life.
Yeah.
Because it's like there are people in the world who, for all intents and purposes, have an excellent life, but their quality of life is garbage. Like they're socially unfulfilled, they're emotionally unfulfilled. And it's like those are definitely a large portion of the people who have depression. We look at like celebrities and kind of household names who
Mhm.
have killed themselves or who have died kind of their own choices. And we talk about all these things, but there's always this like very weird background thread of like, oh, but they had everything. Like they had everything. Like, of course they had a good life. And it's like, well, clearly they didn't. Like clearly their quality of life didn't match up with with like, the actual material
Materials.
measures of a
Yeah.
thing.
Or a perception of it.
Judging someone or worse, condemning someone for wanting to splurge on these sort of tiny moments,
Yeah.
these specific experiences, these specific like material items, something like that, that they perceive and or are correct, because we don't know, we don't live their
Mhm.
life, but they perceive as will increase their quality of life. And it like it's atrocious for someone to be like, how dare you? Like, how dare you buy that avocado toast? It's like that might be their like treat for the week, and they have every right to that treat. Yeah, and I think it's very interesting because it's like there's like two really big questions, which are like, how do you draw the line, and who gets to draw the line?
Well, because we all feel it.
Yeah.
We all feel the pressure to have an appropriate self-care. And it feels icky because it's someone else controlling it doesn't make sense. It's your self-care and other people are judging it. And there's this weird naturalness that we have when we're like, we can have opinion on things that we don't really affect us. Like you
And
could be wearing a swimsuit while in your shower, and I don't think I really have the right to be like, that is really weird and you shouldn't do that.
yeah, the only person who should have any say on that is if I start getting like skin problems, like I'm not cleaning myself properly because of this thing, then a doctor gets to be like, yeah, don't do that. But not random, Joe Schmo down the street who just has an opinion. Shut up, dude. Leave me alone. Let me be a never nude and let me be okay with that.
I never knew it. I love it. So I guess just at the end of the day, it all comes down to really being honest with yourself
Yeah.
and reflecting, one, how you feel and like where you're at, and two, being critical of, is this supporting me the way I want?
I think there are a lot of forms of self-care that on a surface level help you. But when you really actually like dig deep into it and are like, is this particular action helping in the way that I think it's helping? Or is it providing me the relief that I actually need in these moments? You find a lot of those things don't. They sort of just distract rather than actually help. It's very interesting that not only has self-care been presented as this thing that like looks a specific way, sounds a specific way, feels a specific way, and also costs you $40. Like also comes with a price tag, also comes with this public
Yeah.
expectation of what it is. And yet everyone is different. Everyone requires different care and different rest and different distraction versus engagement. And also, they think after a pandemic, you don't need to self care anymore.
Yeah, they think everything is going to be rainbows.
For whatever reason, people are like, oh, yeah, well, when we go back to working full time, we'll feel better. We'll be able to do the things we want to do. And it's like, could you do the things you wanted to do when you woke up at
No.
6 a.m. to then come home from work at 7 p.m., cook dinner, and then go to bed? And so it's like the original system was just as hard
Yeah.
on, your mental, emotional, and physical health. as the pandemic is. It's just in the pandemic, because it's so new and different, I think people are like aware. They're like, oh, well, I feel shitty because of the pandemic. And it's like, yeah, but also if you were working this very rigorous like 40-hour week, especially if you're working at like a customer service job, or you work in a completely isolated like cubicle, like
shift work,
you're gonna be just as mentally and physically exhausted. It's just now you're in your own home, and so you think you shouldn't be exhausted. And you just sort of accepted that like work and like the kind of day-to-day rollings of a corporate work week, that's acceptable burnout. That's what's allowed.
We're like, we can handle this now.
We can handle that. Even though I would argue it's maybe the same, if not only slightly less intense than like this current level of burnout, you know?
Yeah, we're doing a lot of catch up with burnout because, like you said, we have that that little sweet spot. Everyone, we had some actual energy because we weren't working, we weren't in school, but now we had next is the compassion fatigue, and then it hits the like we're straight back into socializing.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
there's
been
no time
for going back into the world, which is crazy. Because transition is hard when you're talking about things that have, you know, a stigma and a bias around them. Obviously there's any conversation is good conversation, but we need to also make meaningful change, because if we just talk about it, it's yelling into the void. It doesn't do anything. And so I think like as we're kind of shifting out of the pandemic, everybody and their parent company has been, you know, kind of publicly saying like rest, recover, self-care, boundaries, respect, like all of those like key words.
And buying into movement.
And like buying into movement, and, you know, and like putting out statements and putting up colors and doing all the things to like, you know, play ally, play advocate, all the stuff. And then as we're shifting out of the pandemic, like I have some friends who work in office settings generally, and they've gotten like notices from their employers that as of, you know, September 1st or whatever, they will no longer be allowing remote access. So if you're not vaccinated, or if for whatever reason you don't feel comfortable coming in, you can't just work from home, even though for 2 years now
we've been doing that.
We've been working from home. And it's sort of like, why wouldn't you just offer it as an option, in the sense that it's like, instead of calling in sick and either having to take a sick day or take no pay for the day, why couldn't I just work remotely for that day? And their whole argument is like, oh, well, if you work remotely for one day, what's to say you won't work remotely forever? And it's like, what's to say that's a problem? Like, why does it matter? I've been doing it for 1.5 years. It's like, how could you have spent so much time using these keywords, so much time advocating for these things, and then genuinely believe that, you know, now that the state of emergency is over, everything just goes back to how it was? Like, no.
That's not how it works. Exactly.
That's not how anything works. Thank you so much for joining us. We've talked about a lot of things, mostly about self-care and about burnout. We would like our listeners to really take an honest look at the self-care that they do for themselves. Really stop and just think about the activities that you do during the day that just sort of help you relax, help you feel better, help you get some rest, and think about how they help you and how they hurt you, whether they help you in the way that you want them to, or they potentially do more harm than you initially realized. But other than that, I'm Haley.
I'm Stephanie.
And thank you for listening to Surviving Social Isolation. Bye.